Hi there, Tech Moms. All right, we are on part 4, Fun with Pivot Tables, working in Excel. So we have an example in Google Sheets, and now we're going to do it in Excel. And there are some pieces to this that can be a little bit confusing, the differences between Excel and Google Sheets. So just pay close attention. I'll hope that I can clear those things up for you. All right, so the first steps here, what we're going to do is create a new tab called Pivot Tables, and then we're going to start asking questions of the data by creating pivot tables. So these are the questions that I am going to ask. Okay, so let's go to our sheet. We're going to create a new tab. So on the bottom ribbon, we'll click New Sheet, double click, and we'll call this Pivot Tables. Hit Enter. Okay, and I actually am going to, well, we can leave it right there, that's fine. Okay, and what we'll do is we're going to jump into the analysis data. We are going to click between column A and row 1 and click all of our data. And what we're going to do is we're going to come to the top ribbon and hit the tab called Insert. And then we're going to insert a pivot table. Now, Excel has 2 different options. You can either hit Pivot Table, and it'll say easily arrange and summarize complex data in a pivot table. FYI, you can double click a value to see which detailed values make up the summarized total. Or you can click this down arrow and it gives you sort of different options. So Excel can get pretty advanced where you're doing it from an external data source, from a certain data model, but we just want it from a table or range. So we're just going to click this button. It's going to pop up and say, hey, what range are we looking at? And you can read this as, I'm looking at the analysis table. It ends in an exclamation point, remember. And then $, we're doing $A through with a colon. That means it's a range through $N. What this translates to is I want you to go to the analysis sheet and look through column A through column N. Remember the $signs, I talked about this in my last video, but that creates an absolute reference. Now this is kind of a more advanced thing, but just know that's what it means. It's an absolute reference. And what I want to do is I want to add this to an existing worksheet because I've already created my pivot tables worksheet. So I'm going to click existing worksheet. And it's going to be real finicky about, like, if I type it in, it's going to be kind of high maintenance about how that needs to look for it to work. So all I'm going to do is once I click existing worksheet and the cursor is kind of pending on this location, I'm going to hit pivot tables and you'll see it autofill with pivot tables, exclamation point. Pivot tables in this case is in single quotes because there's a space. Most software doesn't like spaces, so you got to put it in quotes for that. And then if you tried to do this, it's going to pop up an error and says, hey, that destination reference isn't valid. And you're like, what does that mean? What did I do wrong? What you need to do is jump to pivot tables and select the exact cell that you want the pivot table to start in. It'll be the top left corner of your pivot table. So in my case, what I'm going to do is put it in to, I don't know, A6 will work fine. And I hit OK. And there you'll see I have the start of my pivot table. Now, I forgot one step. What I wanted to do is actually drag in the question that I am answering to live above that pivot table. So this first question is going to be, what is the employment status of applicants that were assigned a cohort? So highlight that, Control C, go back to your Excel, and in a couple cells above it, go ahead and just paste the question. I did it again. We're going to do match destination formatting. I'll make this a little bigger so it's clear that I'm asking this question. Okay? Okay, now to go in and edit your pivot table, you're going to go into, you can click any cell that's inside this pivot table. So if you click inside here, you'll see that I have these pivot table options that appear here on the right. And I'm looking for employment status of applicants assigned a cohort. Now, honestly, I'm not like a wizard at pivot tables. And so sometimes I just have to move stuff around until it looks the way that I'm wanting it to look. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to drag employment status to rows. So that's the individual rows that I'm looking for. I can come here on the right-hand side, I grab employment status and I drag it to rows. Now there's like 100 ways to do that. You can also like just click the check mark and it will default to where it thinks you want it to go. I find it easiest to just click and drag. Okay. All right. So we've got employment status in our rows. And then what we're going to do is grab all of our applicants. So that way we can get a number of all of the applicants assigned a cohort. So contact ID is our unique identifier. I'm going to drag this to columns. Or sorry, I'm going to drag this to values. I apologize. And what this is doing is it's adding up the contact IDs, which that's not really what we want. What that's doing is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. And that doesn't really make sense with a contact ID of a unique identifier. So what we actually want it to do is count each and every one. So instead of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 and so on, it's going to be 1 plus the contact ID of 2 plus the contact ID of 3. And that means 1, 2, 3. Okay. To have that change, we're going to click into value. So instead of saying sum, we're going to click here. We'll have this dialog box open. We're going to click value field settings, and that will bring up this menu. And we're going to say, it says choose the type of calculation you want to use to summarize the data from the selected field. And I'm saying I want to get a count. Hit OK. And there we have the count broken down by their employment status. Now, the last part of this is we're saying, this is similar to how we did count ifs, right? We're adding a bit of criteria. I need to filter down my data to just those applicants who were assigned a cohort. So what that would mean is I'm going to grab my applicant status column, and I'm going to drag that to filters. Let's see, the actual overlap pivot table with data already in the sheet pivot tables. Do you want to place the data? I'm going to hit no because I don't know what that means. Let me play around with that and then I'll tell you what that does. Okay, so we are going to do it. Let me show you what the kind of the process is. So I'm going to drag applicant status to filters. I'm going to hit yes. And what this does is in Excel, this is where I can come in and as a customer, I can come and I can filter these responses myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select assigned a cohort, hit OK, and then that will filter that for me. The other option, we Control Z, is I can come here to applicant status. I can do field settings, and oh, I thought it was going to show me that there. It does not. All right, that's okay. This is a little bit of a difference between how it works with Google Sheets and how it works with Excel. This is where you would go in and that's where you would apply that filter. Okay, so I'm going to come here. Again, I had Control Z out of here. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to select assigned a cohort. And that filters that down to those values. And you'll notice that it removed my question. That's just because of where this lives. It lives, when you add the filter, it lives 2 rows above it. So let me just add that back in. We're putting what is the employment status of applicants that were assigned a cohort. Okay. Okay, now let's jump to our next question. So we're going to, what is the household income of applicants assigned a cohort? So do Control C, jump back to my Excel. We're going to do Control V. I always do that. And we're going, what is the household income of applicants assigned a cohort? We're going to go back to, now I need to insert a pivot table. So the way that I do that, first I need to select the range of data that I'm looking for. So the way that you do that is we're going to click between column A and row 1, in that corner. That highlights all of my data. And I'm going to, with that selected, I'll hit Insert on the top ribbon and Pivot Table. Now it's going to say, all right, is this your range? Are you sure? Again, those ants pop up to show me that that's my selection. Like, yep, that looks good. I don't want this in a new worksheet. I want this in an existing worksheet. And now it's going to ask me for a location. I can come to the Pivot Tables sheet. You could type this in, by the way. It just is easier to not do that. So come to Pivot Tables. Where do I want that to insert? Do a few rows down. I want that to go on column A, row 19, with an absolute reference. Hit OK. And there you'll see that that pivot table inserts into the same sheet. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab like the rows of data that we're looking for is going to be our household income. So over on the right hand side, we'll click household income, drag it down to rows. And then I do want to get like a count. I want to see how many applicants are in each of those. So we'll grab our contact ID, drag that to values. And this is summing it. So we talked about this before. It's adding like 900, it's adding the contact ID of like 900 plus 901 plus 902, and that's where we're getting all those funky values. That's not how my contact ID functions. It's actually a unique identifier. So I'm going to go to the down caret, hit value field settings. We're going to change this to a count of contact ID, hit OK, and there that's giving me what I want to see. Now, it's specifically with the criteria that it's assigned a cohort. So I'm also going to go to my applicant status, drag this to filters, and there, over here on the left-hand side, is where we're going to scroll down to assigned cohort, hit OK, and there we will get that filtered amount. Let me move my cute face out of your way. The number of applicants in their respective household income bins. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're actually going to bin these household incomes up into groups of less than 50K, between 50 to 100K, and 100K plus. And the reason we're going to do that is it just makes it a little bit easier to read. It's not necessarily super helpful to me to see just two people with 250K plus. What I really want to be able to see is just group them grouped a little bit cleaner. So let me show you how we're going to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just to clarify what I'm doing, I'm going to type up here, all right, I'm doing a group by incomes that are less than 50K. I'm going to do a 50K through, let's be consistent, 50K through 100K. And then I'm going to do those that are 100K or higher. Okay, we'll make this look like it's a title, something important. All right. And then I'm going to put here, this is going to be the household income. This will be the count. And this is going to be the percent of grand total. Okay. So let's spread that out so it's a little easier to read. All right, now these are my categories. What I'm going to do is type in here, I've got the less than 50K category, hit enter to go to the next row. I have my 50K through 100K category, enter. I have my 100K plus category, hit enter. And now I'm just going to grab my counts. So I already have the counts in my pivot table. So what I can do here is I'm going to do equals, and I can do either sum, or I can just do the cell plus cell plus cell. So what I'm actually going to do first is this equals the sum of, And I'm doing less than 50K. So that's going to be this, comma. It's going to be, if I could use my brain, this, comma. It's going to be here, comma. And it's going to be here, comma. Now, don't get all stressed about the way that turned out. It should give us what we're looking for. Enter. As you can see, we've got 244 applicants who make less than 50K. So I'm going to do the next one. This equals the sum of those between 50 and 100K. So I guess I actually did this incorrectly. So I'm going to exit. This should not include, this shouldn't include because it's less than 50. So I included between, oh no, I did it right. Okay, never mind. Sorry, I was having a little panic. We're good. We're going to do equals the sum of, let's see, 50 to 100K. So we've got 50 to 75, comma. Now it's showing me exactly what's going on, like what's the next number that I'm doing. So I got 50 to 75, and then I'm going to add 75 to 100, and parentheses, hit enter. Got about 214. And for the final one, equals the sum of everything else. So we're doing 100 to 150, comma, 150 to 200, comma, 200 to 250. That's wild. I would love to make that much money. And then 250 should be the rest. And parentheses, hit enter. And as you can see, we've got 244 making less than 50K, 214 making 50K to 100, and 100K making 98. Okay, now to get this as a percent of our grand total, first we need a grand total. So I would suggest that we do is we actually create grand total. I'm just putting it on the same row as where this grand total exists, just for clarity. So actually let me make these bold. I'm going to do this bold. This grand total, I need to add all of these counts to get that total. So that's going to equal the sum of, and I'm going to click and drag the cells that, like the range I want it to add up. So let me show you that again. So I'm going to do equals the sum, open parentheses, click and drag the cells I want it to add, end parentheses, hit enter, and I'm getting 556, which is what I would expect. Okay. Now to do percent of grand total, I'm going to say this equals this value divided by, that's with a slash, my grand total. Now, if we were to move these values around, or like I were to copy paste this somewhere else, it's going to get kind of funky. So what I'm actually going to do, is come up here to my function bar, and I'm going to add dollar signs in front of my column letters, and as well as in front of my row numbers. Hit enter, and there you can see I'm getting a percent. Let's convert it to a percent. I've got 44% make less than 50K. So let's do that again. This equals this value divided by grand total. I'm going to go up to my formula bar, add a dollar sign before my column letter, a dollar sign before my row number, and same for the others. Hit enter. And again, adding the dollar sign just makes it so that if I copy and paste this somewhere else, it still knows that this, like, keep the same cells that I was using. Otherwise, it can get kind of messy. All right. Now I'm going to do one more, equals this value divided by this value. Make sure it's an absolute reference by putting dollar signs in front of your columns and dollar signs in front of your row numbers. Hit enter. And there we have our percentages. Okay, let's jump into our next pivot table. So the question is, what is the number of students by cohort? I'll copy this, paste it in. Oops, every time. Number of students by cohort. I'm going to insert my pivot table. So go back to my analysis data, make sure I have selected the entire sheet, insert, pivot table. It's going to ask me where. I want to do an existing sheet, and then click the location I want it to insert into. Hit OK, and there I have my pivot table. Okay, so we're going to number of students by cohort. Click onto your pivot table so that this pivot table fields menu shows up on the right. We're going to drag cohort to our rows. And then I want to get a count of how many students there were by cohort. So we're going to grab the unique identifier, contact ID. This is the value that I want to see. Don't add it. That doesn't make sense. So do a count. And there I can see the number of students by cohort. Now, say I was looking for, oh, you know what? This is bringing in everything. So including those who were waitlisted. So what I'm actually going to do is add a filter for applicant status. And in that applicant status, I'm going to come here on the left, and I'm going to filter by those who were assigned a cohort. And what that should do is only show me those students that actually got into the cohort and their respective cohort. So yeah. All right, let's jump to our next question. What is the education of applicants who've been assigned a cohort? I'm going to copy this question into my spreadsheet. Put this every time. Put it here. And then I'm going to grab my data, insert a pivot table in my existing worksheet. Please put it on A77. Hit OK. And there I have my pivot table. Okay, and it's about the same as before. So I'm going to grab education level. I'm going to drag this to my, rows. Then I'm going to grab a count of contact ID. Change this to account. And then I need to filter by those students who have been assigned a cohort. So I'm adding a filter, filtering by assigned cohort. Okay. What we're going to do here is we're just going to take a pause. So rather than just jumping to the next question in that homework, let's do like a quick analysis and see kind of what insights we can gain from, say, just for example, what's the education of applicants that have been assigned a cohort. Now, Allison did this in her video series as well. So let me just show you how we would do this in Excel. So if I look here, I am filtering by those who were assigned into a cohort to see their education levels. Now, these values are helpful-ish in that they give me like the truth, but it'd be really helpful if I could see a percent of grand total to see kind of how, I don't know, it's more helpful if you say 25% of your students have a X degree. So let's see if we can't get that added to our pivot table. So what we're going to do is we are going to add contact ID again, because I want it as an additional column or value, I guess is what I'm looking at. And I'm going to drag this for the second time to my values section. We're going to click the down arrow. We're going to click value field settings. And I'm going to set, I don't want this to be a sum. That's not what contact ID does. I want it to be a count. But instead of showing as just the count of each degree, I want to show that value as, you can come, again, you click that here, show value as a percent of grand total, and hit OK. Now, what that shows me is the percent of students who have an associate's, bachelor's certificate, doctoral degree, and so forth. So I'm actually going to highlight these cells because I don't love having 8,000 decimals, and I'm going to decrease the number of decimals. It makes it a little easier to read, especially for your client. So we're going to jump in here and we'll see, all right, 11% of those students who were assigned, or excuse me, of those who were assigned a cohort had an associate's degree. 35% had a bachelor's degree. 7% has already had a certificate before. And then none have a doctoral degree. 13% graduate professional, 15, and so on. Now, something that would be interesting to see is, what about those who weren't assigned a cohort? Like, what kind of insights could I see from Allison's example is like those who are dead leads. So let's jump in there and see what we can find out. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like copy and paste this pivot table. So I'm going to click and drag all those values, Control C, move to another spot, Control V. I can double click to get that showing. Okay, and again, these ants are going to keep showing up because it's like, hey, you have this selected still. I'm just going to hit escape so it leaves me alone. All right. Now, I have this filtered on assigned cohort right now. What I actually want it to do is filter on dead lead, hit OK. And there I can see kind of side-by-side comparison of these different populations. So interestingly, of all the dead leads, I have 11% who have certificates. I have, as compared to those who were assigned a cohort who had 7%. Maybe I can say I've got 35% that had bachelor's degree versus 25% who had a bachelor's degree. And so this just offers you the ability to, this is kind of how you do analysis with a pivot table, is you can go in, you can filter by different fields. You can add different filters to your pivot table, and you can go through and just get different values that you're looking for. So yeah, let's jump into the last question. And that question is, what is the race or ethnicity of those applicants assigned a cohort? Control C. Let's paste that into our worksheet every time. And we're going to analysis, select all of our data, insert a pivot table, existing, I want it to live here, okay. And I'm going to grab the race or ethnicity. Those are the rows I'm looking for. I'm looking for contact IDs. I want to get a count. I don't want you to add the numbers. And then I'm going to filter by, if I can find it, those students who were assigned, what am I doing? Those who were assigned a cohort. Okay. And there we can see, this looks like it was maybe kind of an open field. Some further steps I could do with this is to group these. So if I put some other race, ethnicity, origin, maybe I could group those two together. I could group American Indian. I could group white and white / some other race. Like what this means is, well, this is my guess because I haven't seen the front end of where they filled out the survey, but my guess is this is where they selected multiple races or multiple ethnicities. It's helpful to see and helpful to know. So that would be something I would maybe note in my data, is that a lot of them are multiple races or ethnicities. But for the purposes of analysis, a lot of times it's better to just group them in a way that makes the most sense. And that is kind of left to your discretion as an analyst. about how you would do that. The way that we would group these is similar to the way that we were grouping household income up here. And that's how you would build your pivot tables.